where those firefighters are doing transport. These guys come in, they want to work on an engine.
I've never seen a burnout of a firefighter making too many fires. Okay. But I've seen some guys burn out that were paramedics because of the responsibility placed on them that was higher than the average firefighter EMT.
And not having...
Of people there. That was impressive to me.
It's a big conference.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's made up mostly of program directors. So my full-time job is program director at OSU, but it's made mostly of program directors and I guess faculty, but there's some medical directors that are there. I mean, there's 700 programs in the country, and so they had about 700 people there.
Outside of of what the conference brought, I'm glad that it came here because I think there's a lot of people that don't understand what Oklahoma City is now versus what Oklahoma City was 20 years ago. And every time I drive by the Omni in Scissortail Park and downtown, I'm a lifelong Okie. So,
well, did you get a sense of that? Did anybody talk to you, or did you get a sense of that at all while you were there? Of, man, I didn't realize there was like stuff to do in Oklahoma City.
I hear that all the time. So. Like say over the past several years, whether it was when I was president of the IFC and traveling quite a bit, and folks would approach me in that same way and talk about Oklahoma City and that they got a chance to come through here, you know, on a trip to somewhere else and stop for a little while and were impressed by what's been happening here over the last 20 years or so. So, and you know, growing up here, I'm really impressed with it. And
so you're also lifelong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Grew up on the south side of the city, so.
And it's a big city. Mm-hmm. It's a big city. Most people don't know that either.
Right.
I mean, what's the size? What's the size comparison to like New York? I mean, do you know the square miles of Oklahoma City?
641, 621, something like that. Yeah.
Well, I'm from St. Pete, and the entire county, St. Pete, Clearwater, that is 200 square miles.
Yeah.
So Oklahoma City's 3 times bigger than the county.
Yeah, that's another thing people don't. And if you tell them to Google it, just Google U.S. cities by land area, and they see us up high on the list like that, and they're like, yeah, they never would have thought that.
Yeah, and so we were talking earlier about wanting to be a helicopter pilot, but how did you go from the military? How did you go from the Army to being a firefighter with Oklahoma City?
Well, I mean, before I went in the Army, I'd kind of made up my mind that's what I wanted to do. In the neighborhood I grew up in, there were several firefighters that lived in the neighborhood. The Boy Scout troop I was in, I had Boy Scout leaders that were firefighters, went to church with firefighters. So there was a few, you know, that I knew growing up. And just kind of hearing them talk about the work that they did kind of got me interested. And so, you know, when I got out of high school, I really had no interest in staying in school. I wanted to do something different. And I thought the military would probably be a good gap filler, if you will, between high school and when I started to work. And so I enlisted in the military, but my MOS in the military was firefighter. So it wasn't easy for me to get in the school in that school, especially in the Army. But that's where it started for me.
Yeah, I mean, most you know, Air Force firefighters that I know are civilians. Right, and so to become one, I can't imagine there's a high quantity of firefighters in the military, so it's got to be kind of a sought after position.
Yeah, I mean, everywhere I went, there was you know, at least a few, if not half and half or whatever, civilian to military. So and maybe the Air Force was a little bit more common. Obviously, the military firefighting school was at an Air Force base. It still is to this day, but it trains all branches at that facility. So, do
you think anybody goes through like rookie school and thinks that they're going to be chief one day?
You know, there are some guys that might throw that out as somewhat of a brag, and some of them are ambitious in that way. And you know, when you go for your pre-employment interview, you pretty well know you're going to get asked what your personal career goals are. And so there's always, a few people that'll say, I'm going to work hard and I'm going to run this fire department at some,
Yeah.
that wasn't me.
They probably read that in some how-to tutorial
Yeah,
online.
I think
tell
it's
them
just tell them you're ambitious. Tell them, that you are goal-oriented. And it's not that I don't have a little bit of ambition about me, but no, I never imagined myself in that role. In fact, I think my answer to that question was, I want to work hard and apply myself, and hopefully I'll be a captain at some point.
Yeah, I mean, how different being a chief is not like being a firefighter. Is a whole set of different roles, and so how would somebody coming in even know what that means? I mean, obviously they know the title, how important it is. How would they even know what it means? When did you learn what a fire chief even was?
Well,
Truly,
I certainly
did.
didn't. I just recognized them as a different class of individuals on the department. I mean, they wore different uniforms. You could just tell by their demeanor and so forth that they were a different group of people. Again, my goal was to be a member of the Oklahoma City Fire Department, period. I didn't really think about where that would take me.
Yeah, so someone told me recently, you've heard the saying, like, you look at like Barry Switzer, national champs. I don't know if you're a Sooners fan or a Pokes fan.
Yeah.
Boomer Sooner all day long, but I know who signs my paycheck, so go Pokes too.
I got you.
But, I heard someone say recently that Barry Switzer was a player's coach, right? The players, they were on the same page. And when I was talking to somebody about you recently, they said Chief Bryant was a firefighter's chief. That was the quote that they told me. What do you think that means?
Well, to me, it means it's a great compliment because, like I said, that was my goal. I wanted to be a firefighter. I wanted to be a member of the Oklahoma City Fire Department. When I got out of the military, they weren't hiring right away, and so I was able to get on the Edmond Fire Department for a short period of time. But again, I wanted to be a member of the Oklahoma City Fire Department. And throughout my career, I just really never thought of myself as anything other than that. And so that was the basis for everything. I was a firefighter first. I guess maybe that mentality was natural for me. So even when I had the opportunity to promote up, that's just still was always my basis, is that I'm a firefighter. And even maybe to this day, and retired and gone on to other things, that I really don't consider myself anything other than that.
I think there's an important distinction that we should make here too on the ambition topic you'd meant. Being ambitious for a fire chief of a 3-station department is one thing, but I grew up in Oklahoma City, and the reverence for Oklahoma City Fire Department, they have a long legacy, they're very revered, and they're a very large department. So to be a chief of something like that is much different than a chief of a 5-station.
Yeah, I mean, one might be a neighborhood thing. I got started at a small department, two station. I mean, it's a wonderful department, high paying career department, pension, everything, but small, right? Oklahoma City is kind of like a machine, though. When you have you have 35 stations, which it wasn't like that when you started, but 35 stations.
Now 38. So
38 now.
Yeah.
And how many operational personnel?
Well, they're up around 1,200 now. During my time, we were right under 1,000. So, but it's still, it's a lot of folks.
Sure. So, I mean, what do you think is the difference between running a 2-station department and running a 38-station, 1,200 personnel department?
Well, you know what? I have a lot of friends that were chiefs in smaller departments. Like say, even going from that 2-station department, on up, from there. I'll be the first to say I always had the utmost respect for those chiefs of the smaller departments because I had a good size and really talented command staff underneath me. So I had 3 deputy chiefs over the divisions of the department, and 20 some odd battalion chiefs that were running their areas of the department. I had a civilian business manager. I had a finance budget specialist and so forth. So I had people in those positions, a public information officer. So a lot of those chiefs of those smaller departments, they are all those people.
They're wearing 1,000 hats.
In one person. So I always had the utmost respect for the people that had to do all those functions themselves, because I was blessed, like I say, with a large department that had the budget and so forth to be able to hire great staff and have people in those specialty roles. So no person had to do a lot of things on their own.
Right. What about when things get too big, though? I mean, there's got to, I think that's always like, is that always like the spectrum of the world? There's always a limit of where things, maybe go too far. And I don't really know what that limit is. But, I've got folks that I talk to at FDNY all the time and talk about a machine.
Sure.
Right. And it's been a while since they've felt that their commissioner, their leaders were a firefighter's chief. And so what's the struggle? Like once you get that big, so for somebody to say that about you, having 1,000 people, which is a huge department, how do you stay a firefighter's chief and stay connected to the men and women that are out there, fighting fire every day and not become too disconnected like some of the bigger departments?
Well, it takes deliberate effort, to stay connected, and you have to take advantage of, the opportunities that present themselves, because you are busy and there are a lot of demands on your time in that position. But the one thing I think that, especially in our department, our chiefs came up through the department. There wasn't any chief that didn't start out as that firefighter, riding the back of a rig. And so we all have that common experience, up to whatever point you decided to, take your career maybe in a little bit different direction. And fair or not, then you develop, that street cred.
Right.
And if people may not like you personally, they at least know that you had that common experience with them. And so when they're talking about what they do and you're having those conversations, they know you understand where they're coming from.
So one of the things maybe that you're also saying is, do you think it matters that we're promoting within versus finding somebody from another department?
I think it's just based on the needs of the department. It's been my experience that the best situation is to promote your leaders from within the department and pick your leaders from within the department. But not every department, for whatever reason, has that luxury. Things happen. So there are times when I think it may be beneficial. And I've even heard from firefighters of other departments that have told me, we really need somebody from the outside to come in and take a fresh look at this, because there were some institutional and cultural things within that particular department that really needed change and needed somebody that wasn't entrenched in some of the things that led to it, going in a bad way. So it's a mixed bag, but I think, I would generally say, and as a default position, that it's the best scenario if you have people and if you've developed those people from within your own department and within your own ranks, for those to step up and take leadership positions at some point.
How far away are we from the bombing memorial?
We've got to be less than a mile.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Maybe,
I would say
maybe a quarter mile.
yeah, five
Four or five blocks.
By the crow flies,
Oh, yeah,
I guess.
I bet Uncle Rico could throw a football from that window and hit.
Uncle Rico could throw a football from
I
here
might
to
could throw a football. Not at this stage in life.
Yeah.
Maybe at one
And so what year did you become chief?
I became chief in 2005.
So 2005, and the bombing was in 95?
Yes, sir.
And so how big of an impact did that play on your career and your pathway to success, I would say?
Like I said, I was a captain at the time. when that happened, I was working shift, and my shift was off duty that day. So I was really like any other firefighter on the department, got called in that day, got assigned whatever task came up. And then, throughout the next couple of 3 weeks that we were there, working, and that's pretty much it. So a variety of roles during that time. I was aware, like a lot of us were aware, that there was a lot of attention obviously focused on us at that time as a department and as a city. I know there was some people like within the media, national media, that had maybe expressed some reservations and so forth as our ability to manage an incident like that, of that magnitude. And we were aware of that as well. But you know what? I don't think it defined our department as much as it just showed the rest of the country what kind of department we had. I thought we were a really good department at that time. We may not have been as staffed and resourced as we would have liked to have been, and we certainly have made a lot of improvements since then, and because of that. But it really didn't necessarily define us as a department. We were used to large-scale events. We had experience with natural disasters and so forth. And maybe the thing that might have set us apart, I think, was, we didn't look as the citizens of this city as just citizens, or in some, you've heard the term customers. We looked at them as neighbors.
That's such a great point, because the majority of the firefighters in this city, this is their community.
Absolutely.
They also live in this
Right.
community. So,
and that I think that's kind of our view. So the care that we exhibited during that time toward our folks here, was a good example to set for some other places in the country, I think, that may not have that same culture.
What when you talk about that national view, or really the international view, right? What role do you think the Chris Fields picture played in all of that? I mean, that was such a. I was 14 at the time. I hate to date myself, but I was 14 at the time, and that's what I remember.
Yeah,
was that picture. And I'll just be honest with you. It was one of the things that I said in my interview when I first got hired was that moment, the 9/11 moment, because I became a firefighter right after 9/11, opened my eyes to that there's people that do this.
right.
Like, and if you're just a young punk kid like I was, I did not have anybody in public safety in my family. That was one of the first, you see it in the movies and stuff, but that was one of the first things that I ever saw that was like, this shit's real.
Yeah.
This is real, but the whole world saw it.
Yeah. Certainly an iconic image. There's no doubt about that. And it will continue to be. A lot of the clippings and so forth that I say from that time, certainly, that's included in those. I worked at the same station as Chris, opposite shift, so I knew him well. When I saw that, it did get my attention, but I'll be honest. Immediately, I thought, oh my gosh, I felt sorry for Chris, because I knew that was going to bring a lot of attention on him for a long time to come, and again continues to this day. And
absolutely.
Anybody that knows Chris, he's not shy about talking about how that affected his life.
Oh yeah, his efforts are amazing. He was in here. We did a show, and he his trauma behind the badge efforts, and some of his advocacy and outreach stuff is pretty strong. And I just always wonder if people like him, if people like you know or knew that while internally, after doing this for 20 years now, I get it. I look at that, and the first thing I would see if I saw something like that today would be like, oh man, I feel for that dude. But back then I was like, I want to be able to help like that. I want to be important.
I thought it was a great representation of our department. It showed our department at work. And actually, what I referred to earlier about, the level of care that we have for the folks that we serve, I think was reflected in that photograph.
Right.
He's really empathetic.
You can see that in the photo.
Absolutely. It wasn't just doing his job. You could tell that that affected him as he was doing that. But like I said, I felt for him. I think the vast majority of the department was, supported him and was proud of that in the way that reflected on our department, and in a department our size, there are a few people that are, they're the human beings. So, not everybody's like that. There are a few petty, jealous attitudes about the attention that brought to him, which was unfortunate. But and he dealt with that with a lot of class, and so he again, I thought it was a great reflection on our department
and the profession, and the profession.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, you mentioned being prepared for the other disasters. I mean, I was telling you a little earlier before we started that, I'm from Florida, and I was always stressed in Florida. People are stressed because of the hurricanes, and there was the last year I was there, I think was 2005, and we had 5 hurricanes in a row. Now, when you live in Florida, especially when you're young, it's just a reason to party. We would have hurricane parties because we'd expect the power to go out, businesses to be shut down. And so we'd find somewhere to, unfortunately, it's a 4-letter word in Florida saying hunker down, where we would hunker down. But you'd always have like a week notice. And when I was thinking about moving here, my mother-in-law, who lives just down the street here, she said, "Oh, Justin, it gets just hot enough in the summer. It gets just enough snow in the wintertime to know that it's winter. But otherwise, it's wonderful." Dude, the first year I moved here was 2009.
I just remembered that was your
2 months after
6 months you were here.
Yeah, we started it, and I was telling you earlier, I kind of sidetracked over to EMSA, and like 5 weeks into the job was that blizzard, like the blizzard. You were still the boss at that point, right?
Sure.
You remember that blizzard? It was
absolutely.
It's like March.
Closed
of
I-35 down.
Yeah.
I mean,
And so I seen that. Then later that year, or maybe later that year, there was a firestorm that came through Midwest City, went up through a bunch of the city, like a firestorm, like a thunderstorm, but it was fire, and just neighborhoods were burning, not a grass fire. And then there were some floods, and then these earthquakes started. And then a tornado took out the Love's truck stop by my house over there on Choctaw and I-40. And I feel like I miss Florida sometimes.
There was probably a few hailstorms mixed in that as well too that did a lot of damage. So yeah.
I forgot about the hail. I got my Twister shirt on. Did you go see the movie yet?
Not yet. My wife went and saw it the other day.
Talking about the natural disasters, I mean, it's not a natural disaster, but the Murrah bombing certainly played, I think, some impact in me getting into public service. But May 3rd, 99, that went right through my neighborhood. I would and so that was my first real, I grew up around firefighters, like my dad's friends and stuff were career Oklahoma City firefighters. But this was like the first time I seen them in action in my neighborhood. And I think that I accredit that to a big reason I probably started into the
and I don't think that people across the country, because again, we had tornadoes in Florida, but they were like water spouts or like F1s, and they might come on land. And in Florida, we used to say the tornadoes have a way of finding the mobile home parks, and the mobile home parks they're not like here, they're not trailer parks. They're like retired.
The entire community.
We had mobile home parks that had their own fire department. They're so big, and snowbirds and retirees and stuff like that. But that one in 1999, and then the one I worked in 2013, these were like a city-wide tornado, like 2 miles wide. And so, Lennon was here not too long ago. Lennon, you alive back there?
Yeah.
All right, man. Just making sure. Everybody's got a teenager. I got one too. I got to make sure he's alive. But they filmed part of this movie, Twister's, right outside here on this road.
Right, yeah.
And I got stuck in it, and so I'm hoping that I'm in one of the scenes. I haven't gone to see one of the movies yet. I ride my scooter in here. Oftentimes, I don't like paying for the parking out there, and so I park on the other side of town, and I ride a scooter in a lot. Mm-hmm. And I was riding a scooter in right here, and I seen all these cop cars and everything, and I just buzzed right past them, and then stopped and saw a New York City taxi cab in the middle of the street, and this whole road was shut down, and they had transformed this whole road into a New York City, whatever. But most of the people who have seen it say that it's pretty that's pretty good. The fire trucks from our school are in the movie. So anywhere it says Stillwater Fire Department on it, because there's a big scene from Stillwater where they annihilate the thing up there. Anyway, got to give credit to Eskimo Joe's up in Stillwater and the Twisters thing. So anyway, but yeah, being prepared for these disasters doesn't prepare anybody for a domestic terrorism thing that takes down a building and kills 180 people or 186 or however many people died. But then you have a worldwide spotlight on you. And I don't know what that's like, but I know what you said about the representation of the department, but that's got to stick with you as you move on to promote and move forward and go on to some other things in your career, that it's given you maybe a little bit more perspective than maybe what other folks have seen around the country. Because, I mean, only so many people were there at 9/11. Mm-hmm. Only so many people were here when this building fell, and it's got to still stick with you.
Yeah, and certainly, like I say, as I moved up in rank and started getting outside the department a little bit more, attending conferences and so forth, certainly the subject would always come up. People were interested in what you were doing, what your position was, what your role was during that time. Like anybody else, they know what they saw on the news stories and read about maybe, but they always want to know the inside story. So what was really happening and that type of thing. So yeah, it's something that still comes up. I certainly don't mind talking about it and sharing with people that experience.
Do you think it's funny or wild, I guess, now that there are firefighters in New York City and, of course, firefighters in Oklahoma City that are on now that they potentially weren't even alive when these things
quite a few of them.
Quite a few of them,
yeah, quite a few of them.
And it's funny to think about that, I guess.
It is. All three of my sons were alive during that time, but they were pretty young. So especially my youngest probably doesn't have that much of a recollection of it at all. I think he understood there was something going on, that was affecting me during that time. But yeah, so we have a whole generation on the department now that really, if it weren't for what they, what we've talked, instilled in them as far as our history and what our experience was during that time. Yeah, they don't. Wasn't something that they.
So it's a part of their onboarding, and you think that's still a part of the
every
academy?
recruit academy, and I would say that was certainly the case during my time as chief, and I believe that's still the case. But every recruit academy is going to go down to the memorial, and go through it and talk to folks about it, and one of the things in the memorial, a lot of the people that responded or had some involvement or whatever, they have their story recorded. So you can sit down at a screen and put somebody's name in and hear their own personal story. So again, it's not something that again defined our department, but it's certainly a big part of our department's history, and we want our folks that are coming on now, especially for the reasons that you say, that they didn't know about it any other way.
Yeah, and that's a federal park now, a federal memorial, right? I mean, that's going to be there forever.
Yeah, it's part of the U.S. park system. Yeah,
right. I mean,
now that's the outside part.
Yeah.
So yeah,
but even the museum is federal, right? It's like a federal, or it's run by them, but it's a nonprofit of some sort.
It's managed by a foundation.
Oh, okay,
yeah. Oklahoma City
it's a touching tribute, man,
Mm-hmm.
because it's one of those museums, right? I'm sure you know, but it's one of those museums that has a start and an end. Like you start here and you follow the path,
right?
And man, it's
And,
emotional.
it's been 10 years or so ago, they did the major remodel of it and so forth. And we're able to get a lot of artifacts that up to that time had been held in evidence by the FBI and other agencies, that they were able to release those. So now that's part of the experience too.
My mother-in-law worked for the district attorney's office. She was part on that prosecuting team, so she was in the courthouse when it happened. But shortly after the bombing, she moved to Denver, where they had set up. They had like recreated with many of the evidentiary findings that you're talking about in these like huge hangars, to try and recreate. So she was on the Terry Nichols,
rebuilding an airline crash.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
You say that, but the Mercury Marquis that Timothy McVeigh was driving when he made his escape from Oklahoma City, they took that apart and reassembled it up in the memorial now in the museum.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's up there.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah.
I've never.
When they put that glass thing in where you can overlook, I think is when they added that. They added a lot.
Yeah, they did a major renovation during that time.
It's nuts to
incredible.
look at. You just sit there and look at the car, and you're like, this motherfucker. You get so angry, but you get so patriotic, and what's the word of being patriotic for your state? I don't know. You just get very representative of your state. Who's that? That was me. Oh hell.
Well, certainly for us that were alive and in the community, like, I had family that was working downtown. I mean, like, so I remember it, and I remember kind of visiting as close as we could at the time with all the fences up, so we could kind of take a look and everything. But you take it personal too, like it's
because I think the initial shock for us was just like other citizens in the city. How did this happen here? We would have expected it to happen in one of the more major cities, if you will.
Yeah, Target is
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, how did this happen here? And so, and then again, there was that feeling too. Once you learn more about it and what was behind it and so forth, there's a little bit of anger involved for sure.
Oh yeah, and I bet you. I mean, I'm sure you know the whole story, but I'm sure that the majority of the people across the country who even know about the bombing in the first place don't know the story, the Ruby Ridge part of it and the Waco part of it, and how all that ties in. On one level, it's fascinating because it just blows your mind, and on another level, it's like he said, it just makes you mad. It makes you mad. I tried to find the oldest possible video I could find of you. Lennon, you got that up?
Back there, yeah.
And so, do you remember this? I'm gonna play just a couple seconds of it here.
I think I know what that is. Yeah.
Go ahead, play that, Lennon.
It's a winter storm that severely struck.
Good background music.
I'd like to introduce you to some of the crew here at Station 30. District Chief Steve Lumry.
Look how happy these guys
Lieutenant
are.
Scott Owens, Lieutenant Mark Calhoun, and Major Gary Jones. First of all, Major Jones.
What are we talking about here? Do you remember this?
During that time.
So the challenges that we probably faced.
I think we're talking about our response to that major winter storm that you may have been referring to, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, you think? What year was this? We'll scroll down. Lennon, what does it say there?
Down power lines.
15 years.
15 years. It might be. Actually, you might be right.
Of course he's right.
Yeah, look at that.
Mechanical difficulties have made it difficult.
Scroll back up. I want to see the video.
Arrive on scene in a timely manner, or to take care of what we needed.
That was the first time I had to pull patients through like neighborhood roads on a sked because ambulances and fire trucks couldn't get into the neighborhood
Oh yeah,
streets.
yeah, it was crazy. And like I say, no power. Nobody had any power. And then that always brings in the related issues of people doing crazy stuff to stay warm, which I'm sure you've both seen, and that brings on its own issues and
What's
responses.
the most generators you've seen on a front porch before going at the same time?
I don't know. I don't know that I've seen just a whole lot, but the other things that are what really, when they bring in a charcoal, outdoor charcoal grill,
Right.
and light that up, things like that, or even like building, like igniting combustible wood
or just lighting
there
the wall on fire
in the middle of their living room or something of that nature. Yeah.
My wife had a practice marriage before we got married, and her husband at the time put one of those like propane flame heaters for like a garage.
Right.
Yeah, like the blowtorch things.
Under the crawl space of the house to thaw the pipes.
Yeah.
Would you believe it burned the house down?
I would believe that. And then when they start turning the power back on because the trees have fell on the lines and compromised the electric service to the houses, and then we started running tons of fire calls during that time. So it was just kind of one thing after another in waves of what we were dealing with.
Yeah, the main thing that I remember from this, I don't know if it was a day or a couple of days, because there was an aftermath, right? Was driving down the highway and just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of abandoned vehicles. And some of them that you couldn't even see because they were covered up by snow, and the snow plow done come up behind them and just gone around them. You know, I mean, I thought it was apocalyptic. I thought it was the
We were
end,
tagging
the end of the
them
world.
with like orange ribbon and stuff at the time because people were, hanging out in their cars because they were stranded.
So then you become chief, and now you're the big man on campus. And what does that do to your daily life? You're going. What were you right before chief? Were you a district
I was the
chief?
deputy chief of operations.
Okay, so is that still Monday through Friday? Okay, so
To me, once you get to that command staff level, you're running a division of the department, or you're the fire chief. I mean, you can look at it as an 8 to 5 day a week deal, but it's 24/7 in a lot of ways.
the phone never stops. All you're doing is putting out the proverbial
especially with the
fire.
department our size, there's always an issue.
Right.
And a lot of times it's just making sure that you're kept aware of what's going on. But you keep a radio by your bed all the time because you want to know.
Right.
And
that
the
messes
phone,
with your sleep.
The phone
for
rings at
sure.
all hours, but just the demands. And this was a part that I was kind of gladly accepted and embraced, was that you need to be out there in the community representing the department, because in a lot of ways you are the face of the department. And while I've talked to some chiefs that don't quite embrace that, or a little bit, don't relish that, I actually enjoyed that part of the job, being out there as the public face of the department.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, I had a vice president that I worked with, and he once told me, because he was talking about moving up and some of the promotional stuff that I've done, and he said, Justin, when you get to my level, which his level, he's basically the head of that organization. He said, all I do is put fires out all day. I don't write reports. I don't tally this. I don't query data. I put out fires all day long. But obviously he's not. He this is an academic setting.
Sure.
But I mean, even as chief, I mean, you're just solving problems all day
There
long.
wasn't very many days that went by that, you may have had an idea in your head how you were going to spend your day. You had certain meetings already scheduled and activities and so forth, but there was always some disruption to that. And, and sometimes it was minor, but it was still something you had to stop what you were doing and deal with it. We had a term for it. We called it the tyranny of the urgent. That was always what was, as much as you wanted to plan out your day, your week, or whatever, and stick to that, there were just going to be daily issues that would pop up that needed your immediate attention, and you had to address those.
So I heard that you were the biggest advocate and king of practical jokes at the station. So if that's true, which you're going to have to tell us some of that, how do you then handle it when you become chief?
Well, I like to have fun. I'll be the first to admit that. I would also be the first to say that throughout that 35 years, there were probably things that happened that probably shouldn't have happened, and maybe were taken a little bit too far. And by today's standards, things that definitely would have got some folks in trouble. I mean, that's just the difference in then and now.
A group of firefighters taking it too far?
Well, I mean, most of the time it was all good-natured. Nobody got hurt. And nobody got mad or anything like that. It was just a way to break up sometimes the monotony of the day, or just to enjoy the day. And, we certainly deal with a lot of tragic stuff and things like that on a daily basis, that, you know, a little bit of fun in your day wasn't a bad thing. Now, like I say, though, you know, things sometimes maybe went a little bit further than they should have, or whatever. It was a different environment then than it certainly is now, and that's mostly for the good. I'd be the first to say that. But I did like to have fun, so I was always wanting to be a part of the fun, and maybe that was one of the biggest difficulties in transitioning from a shift firefighter to, you know, the chief level, and especially the fire chief level. You had to be a little bit more cognizant of, people were always paying attention to you. People were paying attention to your behavior, the things that came out of your mouth, your reactions to certain things. So it's just, you had to pay attention to that more. Now, I'll say again, that even when I was the chief, I still like to have fun, and thank goodness that the admin offices were connected to, you know, Fire Station 1.
Oh, that's right. You guys are Station 1.
Yeah, whenever I got to feeling like it, I could walk over next door and you know, have a little fun with the guys, and, you know, get a few giggles in or whatever. So,
I'm sure you could make a recruit uncomfortable.
That may have been one of the more difficult things for me,
Yeah.
is withdrawing myself from some of the shenanigans.
Sure. So in your time as chief, you know, you looking back, I mean, obviously you implemented stuff, you built stuff, you created programs. What are a couple of things you're most proud of that like legacy that you left behind as chief?
Well, one thing, we grew the department. You know, you mentioned 35 stations earlier, but so during my time, we worked to develop a fire station location plan that we were able to get support from a bond issue to fund. And I knew it would outlive me, just because of the timeline that it takes to, you know, secure property and build a facility and so forth. And, you know, those bonds have to mature over time for you have access to those funds. And so here, just in the last year or so, they opened the last of those stations that we did. So that was one thing. I think one thing that I'm most pleased with were a couple of things, actually. I think just we improved the safety culture of our department. We put a bigger emphasis on it. So anytime that we would go out and apply for grant funding, that was the overarching priority, that it had to address firefighter safety and health. If it didn't, then it got shuffled down on the list of priorities. So from the apparatus that we purchased, from the turnout gear that we purchased, everything had to be what we considered the safest thing we could do for our folks with the funds that we had to expend on that. And I think another thing that we certainly changed the mindset toward physical fitness and health overall. Years before I became chief, I was one of the first people on our critical incident stress management team. So that was certainly something that was important to me. And so I made that a priority as well. So not only the physical health, but the mental health of our folks, and putting programs in place to make sure that we could more adequately address those issues. So it's just a few, but
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
I talked with a couple of people recently, and there was a common theme about your advocacy for women in the fire service, and growing that and promoting that. And, you know, I've worked with Oklahoma City Fire for 15 years now, and some of the biggest, baddest firefighters I know are women. And so did some of that change and grow under your leadership, or was that there beforehand?
It was a little bit there beforehand. We certainly had females on the department from the time I was a driver. You know, we had females, but they weren't really well represented. So when I became chief, obviously one of the goals that the city manager gave me at the time was increase the diversity of the department. And that's probably a common thing among public safety agencies across the country. And a lot of it, you're really limited in your ability to do that just by the demographics of your community.
And the applicants.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so what would you say is the number one way for any agency? It doesn't have to be fire, for an organization that big, if they do have a goal of wanting to do that, what's the right way to become more diverse?
Again, I think you have to be deliberate and almost targeted in your approach to that. You can't cast a wide net and expect it to work. That's been tried. There's other things that have been tried as well, as far as giving advantages to certain groups or whatever based on what your department demographic may be at the time. I don't know that those are been that successful either. You have to be determined in your recruitment efforts and go out and not just advertise that you are seeking applicants from one group or another, but go out and talk to those folks. And the people that are in your department have to be the best ambassadors. They're the people that are in those neighborhoods on their time off from the department. They have the ability to identify quality applicants within whatever ethnic group or gender group you might, be thinking of.
Sure.
And really communicate that message throughout the community that you truly are, equal opportunity. You want these folks to be a part of your organization, that you value them being a part of. And again, it's more than just slogans. It's more than just some of these programs that we're going to increase our applicant pool in this area by a certain number. I've spoke about diversity in the past to various groups, and I said diversity is more than a program. It's a belief. And that's one thing that I appreciate about this community. We're not perfect. Our department wasn't perfect in those regards. But even going back, to the late 50s when we integrated the Oklahoma City Fire Department, it's the acceptance of those folks.
At the operational level, at the station level.
Absolutely. Come in, show us you're reliable, show us you're dependable. You're going to be fine. I can give you examples of what you might call departments in more progressive cities that have had way more problems than we have in terms of discrimination and those types of issues than Oklahoma City's ever had.
Right. It sounds, I agree with you 100%. I think that one, and I'll be the one to say it, so you don't have to say it if you don't want, but a more current, politically incorrect way of saying it, at least in my opinion, is, when it comes to things like DEI and DEI programs, that the focus should be more on don't exclude people as opposed to purposely trying to give somebody credit for who they are in inclusion. And so it's like with hiring boards. I'm always a big fan of, and I know you guys have huge hiring boards at Oklahoma City, making sure that hiring board is diverse.
Sure.
So that they can give an equal decision on the people that they hire, as opposed to giving a certain group more points or something like that just for being in the group. And I think that's what you're saying. There's a lot of other cities out there who not only do they target them, which is fine to target them in terms of advertising and stuff like that, but to specifically exclude this group to include this group, I think ends up leading to more problems in the long run.
That's why I say I've seen a lot of programs that were put in place, and people paid thousands and thousands of dollars to consultants, so-called experts, that would come in and try and show them how to increase the diversity in their organization. And next thing you know, that organization's getting a consent decree put on it by the federal government because that was such a failure. again, to me, it's communicating the right things, and you don't just go out there and, it's not a recruiting poster type of slogan type of thing. People have to see it. So one of the things that, we hear in certain, demographic groups is that, when I was growing up, we were basically told that wasn't for me. That's not something that I could ever aspire to be. So from a young age, they look at other things automatically, and they don't ever give that a second thought.
That's exactly right. And
Yeah.
what I was saying to piggyback on you with the diversity thing is it's decreasing the barriers to the application.
Sure.
There's so many people that would not apply because, as you said, that they don't have a shot anyway.
Yeah. But when that young person is driving down the street with their parents and they pass their neighborhood fire station and they see one thing, then that might reinforce that thinking, that's not for me. I don't see anybody like me in that group. So you got to start somewhere. And like I say, you have to be very deliberate about it, and you have to use the people within your own department to be the best ambassadors as they can for the department, and get out there in their church groups and their other things that they're involved with in their own neighborhoods and so forth, and put that message out there. Again, and that, not to say that it's easy. It's still a challenge.
Oh, that yeah. There's no way it's easy. There's, well, I forget the saying. I always screw it up, so I'm not even going to try. But it's somewhere around where you can't please everybody. You can please this people all the time, but not everybody. There's no way you're going to please everybody.
Right.
Someone's always going to be pissed. But your leadership must have done something. Let him pop that one up right there, because then what year was this? This was 2014. One of the biggest associations in public safety in the United States is the IAFC. Very, very big, very, very powerful advocacy group for chiefs. And so, how did this happen? I mean, that's a big jump. I mean, you were probably already a part of them, right? Even as a deputy chief.
You can add that to the list of things that I thought would never, ever happen to me.
Right.
So, like I said, when I promoted to chief officer, that was one of the professional associations that you could join. So I did. I really wasn't that directly or heavily involved in it. I got myself put on a committee here, a task force here, that type of thing. It wasn't until I became chief and joined a group it's a section of the IFC called the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs Association. So basically the chiefs of the larger cities in the United States.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. I became a member of the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs Association, and I did get more involved at that point at a national level. And again, not something that I thought was for me. I thought, there's other people that are way more interested in that, would be way better at that than me. But there were some people within that organization that encouraged me to consider it. And
do you run? Is it a vote amongst the members?
Yeah.
So you got to just throw your name in a hat and then kind of run a little.
So it's
campaign?
like a lot of other. It's kind of almost a tiered type of thing where you run basically for second vice president.
Yeah.
And when you get elected as second vice president, then you start ascending up every year until you become the president of the association.
I got you. And so how long did your reign last there?
Well, I held all positions, so second vice president, first vice president, president, and immediate past president. So it's a 4-year run once you get elected to the board. Okay. So you're not only president of the association, but you're chairman of the board of directors of that association.
I see. And so when are you still with them? Are you a member of them?
Absolutely.
So but you're not the what's the title of it? You're not like their VP or their president.
I'm
anymore.
just has been in that organization.
you're in the Hall of Fame, but you're still a member.
Still a member.
I got you.
Yeah. Fire Rescue International is coming up next month in Dallas, and I'll be there like I ordinarily would be there.
Sure. So when you at what point in the Oklahoma City promotional process do you have to actually have a degree or have to actually have college?
Chief officer, so the district chief.
So that's kind of
It's a
like
requirement.
synonymous with like battalion chief at other places.
Yeah, battalion chief's just kind of a career development step from.
Yeah.
You start as a district chief, and then you
Sure.
bump up to battalion.
And so they got to have like an associate's or just 60 hours or
Yeah.
something like that. And then is there more when they get higher than that?
Not necessarily, but it's certainly helpful.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not a requirement. So once you get that initial chief level position, there's no requirement beyond that. But certainly, you know, if you want to promote up to deputy chief and even fire chief,
You got competition.
You have competition, and you know, especially the fire chief position. You know, the city manager is going to look at your resume compared to others, and so it's certainly helpful to have a higher level.
And so when did that get implemented for the district chief level, the 60-hour thing?
Wow.
Is that old? They've been around for a long time?
It's been around for a while. I'm going to go back to around late 90s, right before 2000. Our department, we put together a group, a big task group, to look at our promotional system and how we could make improvements to it. And it was called basically it was a career development concept
Right.
that we came up with, and that's when that got implemented.
Yeah, I saw that FDNY requires some college just to get hired.
Sure.
So I think it's not much. It's like 5 classes, 15 hours. I've seen some smaller departments around the country who require a degree for a firefighter just to get hired. What do you,
Well, obviously,
what's the-
I mean, with EMS and the evolution of EMS throughout the ages, you know, when you're talking, you know, some people are required to be EMTs, some people are required to be a paramedic to be hired. So, and obviously, being a paramedic is equivalent to a degree.
Yeah, that's where when I was in Florida, man, you called 911, there'd be 12 paramedics showing up on scene. It was a requirement. And so the reason I ask it, I know you're not the head of the IFC, the International Association of Fire Chiefs anymore. If a department like Oklahoma City, which is such a badass department in my opinion, requires that for such an important position, and if a place like FDNY requires basically a quarter of an associate's degree, right? I mean, 15 hours just to even apply. Well, what's your position, or what do you think? Why has the IAFC been so staunchly against degree requirements for paramedics?
Good question. I would say that I think the IFC promotes higher ed, but I think the IFC at the same time respects the autonomy of the local agency at the local level. And you can advocate for something. You can take a position, you know, in favor of something of that nature. But again, it always comes down to local leadership, and you know, some of the issues that we talked about earlier in terms of diversity and stuff. Maybe we're not still at the place yet where everybody's had that equal of opportunity to get that level of education or meet those requirements, and we're still working toward that. So, I think there are many reasons why, but I think that's really what it boils down to, is that, you know, that each community has to decide for itself what its standards are going to be.
Sure. And they've put out a couple position papers over the years. There was a paper a couple years ago where there was a group of paramedics that published some paper advocating for requiring an associate's degree for entry-level paramedics, and then requiring a bachelor's degree for like critical care and flight. And the IAFC and AEMT and IAFF came out against it. And the thing that I like, and I take a lot of flack for this on the EMS side, I do. The thing that I like about what the IAFC says and IAFF is they're not wishy-washy with their words. They say in their position paper, we're struggling to hire enough people as it is. You put this requirement on, you're basically messing with our supply. One of my responses to that, you know, traveling around the world, seeing how these EMS systems are run across the world, why does a department as big as Oklahoma City Fire, why do they need a paramedic at every station? when a place like FDNY doesn't need any paramedics at any of their stations?
Well, again, it's just their operational model, I think, and how they choose to deploy those resources. Obviously, FDNY is built up enough or whatever that can be its own department, their EMS department. So, in some of your bigger cities, that's what you see.
Well, let me rephrase my question.
That? I mean, really, I think it comes down to the data. I mean, what's the majority of your response volume?
Sure.
What are you responding to more than anything? And so, what is the value to that citizen out there? And you could still make an argument that in most cases, in most emergency medical responses, EMT probably is fine to maybe get that person that initial intervention and get them to the hospital or whatever. But obviously we've seen a lot of cases too, and especially in a city of this size, is that advanced level of care is required as well.
I think
and again, more value to the citizen.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's an argument. I think you're 100% right when you say EMT. The data supports that all day long.
Right.
We could pull up all kinds of published studies that say kick-ass EMTs, or, firefighter EMTs, or just EMTs on an ambulance with great quality compressions for CPR and AED usage and stopping the bleed, or even if they had quick transport to a trauma center or something like that. That it's that BLS care that is safe in metro areas, mind you. And I know you said we have a very diverse geography here, but at least in a metro area, that those EMTs are they're saving the lives. I mean, you take a department like Austin Travis County. I mean, they're a full BLS fire department, right? And I just wonder if over the years, and I think Oklahoma City was probably a bad example because Oklahoma City doesn't do transport. Well, I mean, they kind of do now. But they're not like Houston. They're not like Los Angeles, where they have firefighters who are doing both suppression and EMS transport on like a rescue type ambulance or something like that. And so, I empathize with them that they want to hire good people as well, and that they've got to have the staffing and you got to have that for the community. But I feel like somewhere along the way, the pendulum swung too far. And that
always does.
Man, you're 100% right. It always does. And I think things are pretty chill here where we live now. Where I'm from in Florida, when you call 911, it could very well be more times than not, all 4 people on that engine are paramedics.
Sure.
And then there might be 2 paramedics on the ambulance, and the chief shows up. The other paramedic, you might have 7, 8 paramedics on scene of a cardiac arrest, when really you just need 1.
Right.
And I don't know if that's being addressed enough across the country in terms of the oversaturation of our paramedics. That our paramedics, if you're going to make the argument, which I certainly make the argument, that an entry-level paramedic should have a college degree.
Sure.
But I also think there's too many of them. And that leads to this supply and demand issue of, departments are hiring them. Do you need one at Station 1? And I'm just using this as an example. Do you need one right in the middle of a downtown metro area? Probably not. Do you need one that's 25 miles away on the outskirts? That'd probably be a good place for one. And I don't know if that's being considered enough at big departments.
I think so, because you're all the time looking at stuff and making adjustments in your response and your deployment models and so forth. And that's happened throughout history. We use another example I would give you is hazmat response. Once the fire department started getting into that ramped up and got just been a lot of money spent on it and so forth, and now it's kind of swung back to where it probably the sweet spot that it needs to be in.
Good point.
In terms of what are we really going to do? How do we actually mitigate that that hazard or whatever? So I think EMS is certainly in the same category. I would take issue with you a little bit on how many, maybe too many paramedics. I think I know where you're coming from. But because of the work that they do and the requirements placed on those folks, when I was chief, I was encouraging my district officers and my battalion chiefs, keep an eye on those folks, because some of them are getting overworked in that regard in terms of their work as a paramedic. Rotate them off that ALS engine for a little while. Give them a break.
Sure.
So to me, I think you need a big core of them, but maybe not all of them doing that work simultaneously. Maybe sometimes, you can rotate them in and out of that role to give them a little bit of break, because we obviously started to see the burnout during my time, as far as when we initially ramped up our ALS program. We were already seeing some of them like, I'm done with this. I'm not going to recertify.
Oh, yeah.
We were working them too hard.
Oh, yeah. In Florida, you were allowed to, I think it was a 5-year limit. You were allowed to let your paramedic lapse, and these guys would get hired as firefighter paramedics and then let it lapse. But I think that issue that you're talking about is very, very prevalent at some other big cities as well, where those firefighters are doing transport. These guys come in, they want to work on an engine.
I've never seen a burnout of a firefighter making too many fires. Okay. But I've seen some guys burn out that were paramedics because of the responsibility placed on them that was higher than the average firefighter EMT.
And not having the transport unit with Oklahoma City Fire and the logistical issues of these ALS engine companies waiting with a patient for 20 plus minutes for an ambulance to show up, and they're having to attend this call, and then they do that 10 times a shift. I could see how that would really cause some fatigue.
Yeah, and so therefore now you're getting back into recruitment and retention issues and so forth. I think I'm still an advocate for having as many as you can have, but it's just how you manage those personnel and making sure that you're keeping an eye on them and not letting them get to that point. But
so, what do you think of the new transport service here in the city? Are you familiar with it at all?
Yeah. I talk to Chief Kelly very often, and I know he was excited about it. I think it's time as in this city's come. I mean, you've seen system after system. We were one of the last, if not one of the last public utility models in the country, although some people quit using that term, public utility model.
A lot of people don't even know what it means, but the one down in Fort Worth's about to go. Yeah. Right. And the only one's going to be left, I think, is St. Pete.
But it served this community for a long time. And there was a high level of citizen satisfaction. But obviously, again, as demand increases, you have to rethink your deployment model. During my time as chief, I went through 3 of those window of opportunities, as we used to refer to them back then, when the council had the option of opting out of the current system. I never advocated necessarily one way or the other. I was kind of put in that position. But I had other thoughts about that. I personally, I didn't like the way the trust was structured. I didn't think that
very unique.
I didn't think that served the best interest of the city. But as far as deployment, come on, let's look and see what's going on around there and how we maximize the resources that we're getting the best use out of them. And so, we started to see what you might refer to as a hybrid system start popping up, where, the fire department had a certain number of ambulances and at peak demand times, if the private transports were slammed, you'd kick those in, but they weren't necessarily a full-time, in-service apparatus. So I'm anxious to see how this is going to work. Again,
I think it's the greatest thing in the world. I mean, and I, again, as a paramedicine EMS advocate, I take a lot of flack for that, but I do not care whether or not it is third service, which is the dream that most people want, Austin, Travis County, places like Lee County, Manatee County, some of the big places in Florida. That's the dream for a lot of paramedic advocates. But what really matters? We have the best equipment. We have, and this is going off data over years. We have the best equipment. We don't work 24-hour shifts. We are not firefighters. We have a pension. We have a career ladder pathway. We are not responding to every BLS call. We're not doing transfers. And this new setup that Oklahoma City Fire has all of that.
Right.
And so who cares that it says, if you're a paramedic advocate, who cares that it says Oklahoma City Fire on it? It is a phenomenal career opportunity, in my opinion. I think it's an amazing thing, and hopefully, in my opinion, leads to a wonderful tiered system that might end up being here one day.
Sure.
Where either private EMS or the local public utility model ends up, doing the BLS responses, and, if they have to step it up to ALS, maybe it's fire or something like that. City of Tampa does that. Hillsborough County does that. But I think it's a great thing that they've started, and it seems to have been. It's only been 3-4 weeks. It seems to have been accepted pretty well by the rest of the department too.
Sure. And during my time, there was probably not a lot of political will or initiative or whatever to go in that direction. We did a citizen survey every year. The survey came back that most people were pretty satisfied with the EMS system, not knowing exactly how it worked.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss.
Exactly.
Sitting from my office.
They knew when they called 911, somebody's going to show up, and they were going to show up fairly quickly.
Sure.
Right.
And that was the bottom line for them. But they didn't really necessarily know how it was structured, how it was funded. Those details weren't out there. And so therefore, political leadership, they looked at it as more of a risk to do something different.
Always is, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's the way we've always done
it.
it.
That's the way political leadership looks at things.
Yeah.
And they're risk averse. And maybe that's a good thing.
Sitting from my office at work, looking out the window, I look right at an ambulance bay of local hospital, and seeing that bright, shiny red Oklahoma City Fire ambulance pull in, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a hell of a rig. And so speaking of politics, we don't talk about politics on this show, but speaking about politics, one day Trump's office calls you. What's that like?
Okay, I'll add that to the list of things that I thought would never, ever happen.
I see a pattern here.
Who would think that phone call? So who's the phone call come from?
A phone call came from a person on the transition team who was part of the transition team that was looking at possible employments within the Department of Homeland Security. So that was their role in the transition team. And the way they do that is they kind of go across the professional organizations out there and ask those professional organizations to provide them some names of people they think would be fit for appointment. And so my involvement in the IFC probably had a great deal to do with that. And they reached out to me and said, your name's been given to us as a possible appointment for the U.S. Fire Administration. Is that something you'd be interested in?
When you say they called you, was it literally a cold call? Like you were not expecting this phone call? Nobody gave you your secretary says, Chief, you got a call online too.
I wasn't necessarily expecting it, but it didn't surprise me either in that the executive director of the IFC had a conversation with me at one point, and he said, Keith, the election's coming up. The transition teams are going to be reaching out to me. Can I give him your name?
So this came from a peer recommendations.
Right.
Yeah. Put you up for it.
At that point, I really didn't know how those things worked. I would have assumed that there were people actively pursuing those positions and those appointments, and I certainly wasn't. I was content. I was content doing what I was here in Oklahoma City. So, and I thought, or, that there might be some patronage going on, that, you might be somebody that has a close relationship with the United States Senator, or somebody that could help you with that.
Sure.
So, so the fact that they called me, I thought was a formality on their part.
Yeah.
That they were just going down a list, checking names. This one said yes, this one said no. And that's really as simple as it was, that initial call. Is that if you were chosen to serve in that, and chosen for this appointment, would you be willing to serve?
Wow.
Okay.
And then there's what's the vetting process like? That it's got to be one of the most difficult things for
Terrifying.
for a
I was going to
president.
say difficult. I was going to say terrifying.
I mean,
Like,
President
oh my
Trump
gosh.
comes in and he wins in 16, and so this is before he takes office in that 4 month period, and he's got to fill over 1,000 positions, I think, right? I mean, between judges,
there are literally
and,
thousands of presidential appointments. In every administration.
But this one is the head of firefighting in the United States, basically, at least at the federal government level, and they can't get crazies in there. They got a vet. So what does that look like on your end?
Well, so right after the election, then things picked up a little bit. There were more phone calls. There was a telephone interview with some people within the Department of Homeland Security. And then I want to say it was in the spring, around April, after the inauguration. And I still think that there's got to be a couple of hundred other people that they're looking at more seriously than me.
Right.
Got
that imposter syndrome going on.
Especially because of the level of communication.
Right.
That wasn't that much. And so phone rang one day, and this is so-and-so, the Department of Homeland Security. We want you to know that your name was given to the secretary, which was General Kelly at that time, before he became chief of staff.
Yep.
And he is forwarding your name to the White House for possible appointment. My question was, how many other names is he forwarding over there? And they said, just yours. And I knew at that point it was, okay, this is serious.
Wow.
So this actually may happen. And up to that point, I thought more than likely not.
And were you married at the time? Are you married? So what's the pillow talk discussion with something like that?
Well, that was the thing. Every time I had any kind of phone call or conversation with them, they would always end it with that: do not discuss this with anyone,
Including.
You can tell your wife, but
then you got to swear her to secrecy.
Exactly.
I don't know that-
want this
So you don't
being
tell your
discussed.
wife.
They
is
don't,
what-
want, they don't want that getting ahead of what their
Right.
timelines and
Sure.
so forth. So after that, I knew it was pretty serious. And then the vetting part that you talked about started. So you have to complete packets of information, provide names of references.
Give them passwords, your search history on Google, everything.
Have you ever been to Thailand?
Your fingerprints, you have to go get printed and send that in. And then once by the time you get that done for like Homeland Security, then the White House comes in and they want you to do it all over again.
Of course.
So the last thing was a interview with an FBI agent who actually came to my office and basically went over all the stuff that I had previously filled out and that they had checked on. And I don't know if they were just trying to confirm that what I told them was actually the case, or maybe catch me and give them a different answer. I don't know.
Perjure yourself.
And so one of the questions, and it kind of goes back to one of the things we were talking about earlier, they wanted to know if there was anything I could think of that anybody could blackmail me over or bring embarrassment to the administration. And so that's when I had to talk about those issues. And I said, look, I've been a member of this department for 35 years. I've been involved in my share of shenanigans and stupidity, but nothing that I wouldn't admit to.
Right.
And so
They were satisfied.
I guess, because it was funny because I didn't hear any more. And they said, well, the president on every Wednesday, I think it was, takes his appointment book out, and he'll approve so many appointments. So we don't know when that might be. Just be prepared for it. And at that point, they still didn't want me talking to any. And I said, look, I have got to tell my boss. I don't want my boss to find out.
Oh, that's a great. I didn't even think about that.
From some other
And
way.
your boss is the city manager?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I mean, you're an acting chief of a major department at the time. Wow.
And they said, okay, you can tell them you're under consideration and leave it at that. So
Right.
anyway, it's a process. It's an interesting process.
And then when they offered it, were you like,
Let me think
is the
about
pay negotiable? Did you say that?
No, it's pretty cut and dry. Your pay is set by Congress, and it's pretty much what they get. So, that's all cut and dry.
Sure, sure.
But I literally was at a friend's house, just hanging out, and a friend of mine from the East Coast saw it in the Washington Post as a little blip in there that President Trump expressed his intention to appoint Keith Bryant as U.S. fireman. It was like that much.
Yeah.
They didn't tell me that he had done it. So that's how I found out, was from a friend on the East Coast.
You found out
that saw it in the newspaper.
a phone call from a friend.
Yeah, and then
on
the phone
East Coast.
started blowing up. So, but anyway, that was the process, and interesting. And again, I never expected. I knew the people that had been in that role previously. Thought they were great people, but that was just something that I thought that's something that.
Lennon, go ahead and play this. And so I think this might be right down the street. And so this,
Gerald Keith Bryant.
Yeah.
and so who's swearing you in there?
That's Federal Judge DeGiusti.
See at the Oklahoma courthouse here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
who's
had
the
to
young
be sworn
lady
in
there?
by a federal judge. That's my granddaughter, Kate.
Oh, that's great.
Fantastic.
I thought it'd be nice for her to hold the Bible for me.
Yeah.
Oh, look at, and then you're right. Oh, you're right there where the tree is.
Yeah, it's a survivor.
Survivor tree. Yeah.
Bryant will assume his new role as the leader of the United States Fire Administration.
And so that's oh, look at all the people there.
And your guys came out. A bunch of Oklahoma City
Yeah,
guys
yeah,
came out.
yeah.
President Donald Trump for this appointment. Also would like to thank and recognize former Department of Homeland Security Secretary General John Kelly, who
That's
made the
wonderful, man.
recommendation to the White House.
And so the United States Fire Administration. This is the name of the agency. And so, what's the job description there?
Well,
In
the Fire Administration was established back in 1974. There was a report that came out. It was a report commissioned by the president at that time to study the fire problem in the United States, because there were just too many lives being lost to fire, too much property being damaged, destroyed. And he wanted to know what the fire problem was. So the document that was generated from that study in that report was called America Burning.
It's a dramatic title.
Yeah, and it gave basically a picture of what the fire problem was in the United States, and so it was decided at that point, and the recommendation is that a federal agency be stood up to address that fire problem, and so it was the United States Commission on Fire Prevention and Control initially, or whatever, and that quickly transitioned into the United States Fire Administration. And so, so the two main missions of the Fire Administration at that time was to provide education and so forth to the fire service leadership across the country. And so that led to the establishment of the U.S. Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland. Which is again a kind of a higher ed institution for fire service leaders, and it was also charged with collecting data to monitor what the fire problem was in the country. So, and that's still kind of the two of the main missions of the U.S. Fire Administration, is provide education for fire service leadership, so they can take that back home to their local area and be more effective leaders and address the fire problem at the local level. And again, to collect data make sure that you're kind of staying on top of that and what the issues are and what the priorities should be.
And is there a funding process too? Is there a grant process that the USFA or that local departments can apply for grants through them?
Sure.
And what do those grants fund?
So over time, the fire administration became part of FEMA after FEMA was stood up, and then FEMA and the fire administration became part of Homeland Security when Homeland Security was stood up. So that's kind of been the evolution of it. So they're considered FEMA grants, but they're through the United States Fire Administration. One is called SAFER, which is staffing
renewed,
for
right?
adequate fire and emergency response, so that you can apply for grant funding for people, for personnel. So if your department is struggling to adequately staff the apparatus and so forth and provide that level of human resources out there, you can apply for grant funding for that. And the other one is the Fire Act grant, which basically funds equipment, programs, things of that nature. So fire apparatus, SCBA, those types of things. And those are, I think last time I checked, they're about $3.5 million a piece. So
Right.
yeah.
And didn't one just get renewed like just a couple weeks ago?
So the fire administration was reauthorized. So every so many years it has to come up for reauthorization. And along with that, they reauthorized the grant programs.
Okay, I see. I see. So did you ever get to meet the president?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
how'd
on
that
occasion. I found him to be a pretty down-to-earth person. I think,
Were these public events or private events?
they were more like agency events. So there were he would come over to FEMA headquarters at the beginning of every hurricane season to get a briefing on the hurricane season forecast.
Right.
What they were forecasting for that season. And so, again, my office being in FEMA headquarters, he would take the time to stop and visit with folks in the office, him and the vice president, and was, like I say, the times I was around him at an awards ceremony one time, and he struck me as a pretty down-to-earth individual. He's appreciative of the work that people did and their service. And maybe you didn't see so much of the other, what you might consider the political performance that you might see on camera, on campaigns.
He's a showman.
And so forth.
Yeah.
He sure is.
He knows.
I
He
think
knows.
so.
He knows when he's on stage.
It was
right?
my personal opinion that a lot of that was intentional and for a purpose.
Oh yeah. The only thing about him that I think really applies to this would be. And again, I don't even think it's really political. It's more of just an administration thing. You're appointed, or were appointed, so he can fire you whenever he wants, right?
Right.
And there's kind of a reason for that, right? Presidents have that because they want their kind of influence over everything. But then everybody who works underneath, how many employees were at the USFA?
Full-time employees around 150.
Yeah, so it's a pretty small agency.
In the terms of federal government, it is a very small agency.
Versus like the FBI has got like 40,000.
Yeah.
IRS has whatever.
We weren't that big of a bureaucracy that we couldn't get things done and that we always got in our own way. So that was one of the better aspects of being in a small agency like that.
Non-controversial.
And very much bipartisan support for the fire service, fire and emergency medical services, I should say. So you got good support from Congress, not controversial in any way, and again, small enough to not let the bureaucracy bog itself down.
Yeah. And so when a new president comes in, do you know you're getting fired? Or do you have do you have to get vetted again, or are they already like? How do you find out?
It's pretty cut and dry. So right after the election in 2020, within days, I received a packet. And
really?
And it says, it was in the 3-ring binder, and it's basically
Thank you for your service.
These are all the things that you need to do to be ready to be be done by January 21st.
And is there a handoff to the next person or anything?
No, not officially, but I certainly knew the person that succeeded me in that role, and she's doing a fantastic job. And somebody that her background lends itself very well to being the head of that agency. So, and again, I knew the people that did it prior to me, and I really thought well of them as well. I mean, some of them were personal friends of mine. So,
Yeah, I wonder how a president makes that decision, because you know the head of the FBI was testifying today. I was watching a couple of minutes of that. Poor guy. Anybody who's got to stand in front of Congress, but he's a Trump appointee, so he's still there. And so it's just interesting how some people are like, yeah, we're getting rid of them. These people.
yeah, there's different classifications of appointees, and there's some. It's a very few, but there's some appointees that are permanent. And so as long as they want to be in that role, or unless something really bad happens or whatever, they can remain in that role. But for the most part, they come and go with each administration, which is it's good and bad.
And so, if he becomes president again, you think you can get your job back?
People have brought that up, and again, I didn't think it was very likely the first time. I think it's probably even more.
But it's so crazy because this has
likely
never happened before. So if he does get elected, there's so many firsts.
Yeah.
He's got to be like, well, why don't we just find the people who didn't cause me trouble last time, and they're a shoo-in?
Yeah.
Because no controversy.
It was a little bit of a joke when it came to me. It was something I would use when I would speak to groups and everything, and I would tell them how long I'd been in that role, and then I would follow that up with, and that probably makes me one of the longest tenured appointees in the current administration. And but there was people come and go in those roles, but I was happy to serve almost the full term.
I've never really understood the president. I mean, I certainly understand the 4-year terms and everything, but in a typical position at 4 years, you're just really getting comfortable, and then now you have to change it all up.
And that's certainly one of the downsides to it, if you will. You can get some stuff started. More than likely, you're not going to see it through to its fruition. So there's things going on here in the last year or two that were things that I was able to initiate that they're finally getting to complete those
That's
things.
Got to feel powerful.
It does. But you go into it with the knowledge that it is a temporary role.
It's got to be a big leap, though, too, because you're the head of a wildly popular, kind of progressive department here in the city that's doing great things, and you got a solid paycheck, right? And that you're giving that up for something that could only last a month, it could last a year. But part of me also makes me think that it's got to be a no-brainer. President asks you to do something.
Sure. I mean, I almost kind of looked at it kind of almost like military service. I didn't look at it so much as a individual, in this case, Donald Trump.
Right.
Offering me this. It was my country asking me to serve in this role, and I didn't think I could say no.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's got to, what do you wear on your neck as a chief? What's on your collar?
5 bugles.
5 bugles. Ever had anybody turn their bugles into you?
Only once.
I keep thinking back to you can't give a 2-week notice as a fire chief. When you get this call, don't tell anybody.
Right.
And they expect you to
When they actually allowed me, I sat down with my boss and I said, hey, look, I need to tell you that I'm under consideration for this appointment. And if they call me and tell me that it's confirmed and it's offered to me, that I'm going to accept it. And I think, he wasn't in any hurry to get rid of me, I don't think, or wanted me to, leave. But I think there was a little bit of pride involved there, that was a representation of Oklahoma City. And I looked at it that way as well, too.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that as I was kind of just, reading about your story. There's got to be there's got to be, you know, Trump maybe looking at that, or maybe people looking at it and then sharing that information with them. Hey, man, this not only is this guy representative of, I don't know, your administration, whatever, but man, he was there at the bombing. He was there, and he represented that city, you know, after that, and he's led that city. And I bet you when somebody heard that, was probably like, you know, well, Oklahoma City did it right. Well, of course, bring that person in. It's got to play a role, I would think.
I think it did. Like I say, I think the work of our department, what we were known for, what we were known as, who we, you know, just again, our identity as a department helped in that way too. That you know, no major issues, no ongoing issues. We knew how to treat people. We knew how to take care of our folks. We provided quality service for the community. Yeah, all those things.
Up to this point, me and Justin have not done a video over Oklahoma City firefighters kicking homeless people on the ground or throwing them upside down on a stretcher or anything.
No, that wasn't.
You're right. Like the Oklahoma City Fire Department, I feel has represented themselves.
Yeah, we do some
for
shows.
the most part.
on that.
Again,
Yeah.
you don't see us in the news for negative reasons on a regular basis. And again, I'll go back. We're not perfect. We had our issues. You know, some of our folks didn't always think and act appropriately.
How can you with 1,000 people?
Exactly. But I think to me, it's more about how you address those issues. You know, you don't hide from them. You don't try and deny them or anything like that. You're up front. You communicate with people. This was wrong, and this will be addressed, and this will not be a continual problem for the folks out there. I mean, it's really, to me, and how those, I think people understand.
Yeah.
You know, that there's going to be some folks that do some.
It does matter how you handle it. I mean, it's everything. You know, you see something bad, and you watch it on video, or you see people talk about it, and then if you're like me, the first thing you want to know is, well, what did their administration say about it? And if they come back and say, we've reviewed this and find nothing wrong with whatever, it just kills the confidence.
Right.
Absolutely kills the confidence. Lennon, pull this up. This is kind of weird. I don't know if Zach knows about this. Unfortunately, I'm sure you know about it.
Oh, wow.
And so this is it says Oklahoma fire chief killed over job application. And so I think Lennon pull up 15 as well. And so Nichols Hills, you know, for people who aren't local, Nichols Hills is this city that's like 1.2 square miles.
Right.
It's less than 2 square miles, but it's kind of surrounded by Oklahoma City.
on all four sides, yeah.
Yeah,
Except
it's
for a
like
little bit on the village.
What do you call it? Is it like an island? An island within Oklahoma City?
There's 3 or 4 of them though in Oklahoma City.
Right, yeah. There's about
four
three cities
parts.
that we completely border on all four sides.
And so this is like the old. How would you describe Nichols Hills?
It's very affluent.
Yeah.
But it's probably one of the first affluent communities in the city. You know, as the city was building up, that's where the people that were wealthy started building and living.
The country club came in. And,
Correct. Yeah.
And so I didn't know that this was on Dateline.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever saw this, but this is just a little teaser for it. But go ahead and play that, Lennon. So this is like a little Dateline
Just about
teaser.
a dozen miles west of Oklahoma City sits a town called Mustang.
And so Mustang's just 10 miles west of here.
Helping neighbors.
In a place like Mustang, neighbors know almost all.
And
there is
so
to know about each
the story
other.
does a
For
bad
better
job of explaining that Nichols Hills is not next to Mustang or anything. But this lady calls and she says that her
Firefighter
husband's
Keith Bryant, so tough,
it has been
brave,
shot, and this
spent
guy's
his
name is
career
Keith
running
Bryant.
toward danger.
One letter
Now
off
his
from
life
you.
had been cut short.
Couple miles down the road. Pause it for a second. Couple miles down the road, his department. And he's the chief.
Right.
And he gets shot in the back of the head. And I want you to pause it there, Lennon. But there was this other. So this lady calls, says, my husband got shot in the back of the head. She's crying. Pull up number 12, Lennon. And this is the video that I remember. Yeah, play that one. It's just a quick little blurb. Eyewitness News, late breaking.
We have some late-breaking news right now. I'm Matt Garcia. New information about the
I don't
shooting
know what happened to
death
Matt
of
Garcia.
the Nichols Hills Fire Chief Keith Bryant. Brian's wife is giving investigators new clues right now.
So she's being real helpful.
Katie Blakey just talked to police and is live from the chief's home in Mustang. Katie, what can you tell us?
Well, we have confirmed what the wife says. The intruder in her home last night she says an intruder broke into their home around 10 o'clock last night through an open garage door, walked in and said, quote, "I'm sorry, you should have given me the expletive job," end quote. He did not want that information released, but we are told
she confirmed it. That lady confirmed. She said, "We've confirmed," and so that's what this lady says, right? And at that time, and you probably already knew Chief Bryant because he's
very good friend,
because he's local.
Yeah.
How does this unfold in your world? Because her quote right there then immediately changes the investigation. It changes everything and makes everybody locally think that he was trying to go and kill you. And this was a case of mistaken identity.
Sure.
How did that go in your world?
Well, I was out of town. I was out of town with my wife, and I get a call from the chief in Mustang, who is also a good friend of Keith's. So we were all good friends. He made me aware that because we've just responded at Keith's house. He got shot. And the one thing that he told me at that time, he didn't go into that issue as far as the mistaken identity thing. All he said to me is, "Keith, something's not right here." And that's kind of the way he left it. And so as I got information that was the report that the law enforcement was given, that the person came in there and said something to the effect, "I'm sorry, but he should have hired me." It didn't sound right to me either, but the thought that it could be true and could be a case where he was actually looking for me instead of Keith made me sick to my stomach. I mean, I was like literally ill over just that thought, even though the other part of my brain was telling me this doesn't add up. And so as the events unfolded, obviously I was staying in close contact with the Oklahoma City police chief, who was talking to the Mustang police and so forth. So he was kind of keeping me up on what was going on with the investigation. It was later. I was on my way home from being out of town, and when I landed in Oklahoma City, I turned my phone on, and the police chief here in the city said, "Give me a call when you can." So I called him, and that's when he told me that Keith's wife had been arrested. And he said, it's pretty much a for sure thing. So
yeah. So pull up a 14. What?
I think
for a second.
Weapon that night.
Yes.
So it wasn't much of a timeline, is what you're saying.
I think law enforcement had a pretty good idea that night that there was, not this was.
I think it was in the dryer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Play this one. This one's pretty short, and so I maybe I didn't realize that timeline was so short. And so
detectives of the Mustang.
This is the chief of Mustang.
The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation arrested Rebecca Louise Bryan.
Oh man!
At 800 South Meridian at the Hilton Garden Inn, and she was taken to the Canadian County Jail for.
So this is just a day later, a day or two. She's under arrest, and so yeah, you're right. She throws the gun in the dryer. Mm-hmm. Has the bullets there, the guns registered to them, and everything, and turns out her story is complete. Sure.
But just in those couple of days, they parked an officer in his police car outside my office here in the city, even though I wasn't even in town at that time.
Because they're thinking somebody's on the loose.
Right. My next door neighbors, and in fact, my house where I lived at that time was in southwest Oklahoma City and was not too far from Keith's. Mm-hmm. We're talking a couple of miles from where Keith actually lived. My next door neighbor was Oklahoma City police officer, and she would park her vehicle in my driveway just for that presence there and so forth.
You can leave it. Don't worry about it.
So again, that 2 days following again was a little bit surreal and unnerving. But again, there was just that thought in a lot of people's heads that this doesn't add up. And but
I mean, add that to the list of shit I don't expect to happen. I mean, there's another Justin Hunter in this state who's a paramedic.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, our stuff gets mixed up all the time, and especially when I first moved here, because everybody's got something through OSU in Stillwater, some certificate or something, and we always get stuff mixed up. But I guess it's good that you weren't here, because it would have almost made things even scarier if you were here.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I might have been a little crazier, I guess. That night when I got notified, I tried to call everybody I could think of, my parents, my sister.
I bet.
And like, look, you're going to hear stuff on the news. This is not me. This is another guy. I wanted to try and cover that as much as I could. I told the department, make sure you get word out to the department. The one person I forgot to call was my little brother. And the next morning, his wife got up and turned on the news, and that affiliate actually got it wrong. They actually said Oklahoma City Fire.
Oh my God.
And she just, that was terrible. And I felt so bad that I did not reach out to them. But I feel bad for the family. I mean, Keith was, like I say, Keith was a good friend, and that was a tragic deal.
And a leader of a wonderful organization.
Sure. Yeah. And had been a friend for a long time. And so I just felt terrible that his family had to endure that tragedy. And
yeah, I mean, there's multiple people. I mean, even her, I mean, that whole family is impacted.
Right.
By that,
so
what? It's mind boggling to think that happened. And then it all, because it was so cut and dry, it just kind of disappeared. You know, the poor guy has a beautiful funeral, and I'm sure the memory lives on strong at Mustang's fire department.
Well, and believe it or not, when I get out away from the city and go into various conferences or whatever, I'll get approached about that almost more than anything else. People, again, will see that Dateline episode or whatever. Again, evidently, they still air it in reruns and so forth. So, yeah, I still get approached about that fairly regularly.
And so, and so you lose your job. Biden comes in and says you're out, and now what?
Well, I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Motorcycle off into the sunset.
I felt I was still able to contribute and still wanted to be involved, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And it wasn't that I was out, scouring, the internet for job openings or anything like that. In fact, I thought maybe now I can take that time in between things to actually take some time, think things out, and kind of make a more informed decision about what's next. And I was approached by some members of the State Fire Marshal's Commission here. So it's a 7-person commission. They're all gubernatorial appointees, but they have the oversight of the State Fire Marshal's agency. And in fact, during my time as chief here, I served on that commission. So I had some familiarity with the agency.
Does every state have a fire marshal's office? Is that across the country?
Pretty much, but
normal?
It's different how it's managed and who it's managed through. Some are managed or operated out of the state insurance department. In Florida, the chief financial officer of the state is also the state fire marshal, and kind of
makes perfect sense.
So it's just different everywhere you go.
Yeah, and so you're saying that the other people that are there are appointed by the governor, but you apply.
The commissioners are appointed by the governor, but they have the oversight over the agency, so they hire.
I see.
the state fire marshal and the assistant state fire marshal.
And so what's in Oklahoma anyway, what's the state fire marshal do? What's the mission of that office?
So we do code enforcement and fire investigations in unincorporated areas of the state. We also have jurisdictions over prisons and jails. Some colleges, not all of them, but some. Any state-owned or leased property throughout the state would fall under our jurisdiction.
So Oklahoma City has a fire, needs it investigated. They got their own people because they're big enough. But you got other
They're
smaller
their own
agencies?
authority having jurisdiction. So any town, any city, any political subdivision in this state that wants to be their own authority having jurisdiction in terms of building code and fire code can do that. And there's about 180 some odd cities and towns, some counties in the state that have their own jurisdiction in terms of building code.
And they can do their own investigative
Correct.
to
Right.
some of those. But then there's a whole bunch of other ones that
Right.
if there's they don't have the means to investigate a fire crime, and then that would defer
They don't
to
have fire investigators. They don't have code enforcement officers. They don't have building officials. So when there's some kind of construction project that they're going on or whatever, then we would do the permitting.
I see.
And the inspections of that facility.
And so is that like automatic go to you, or do they got to request that? Do they got to request assistance if something happens?
Yeah,
if
if they fall within our jurisdiction, they're required to submit. Again, if they're going to build a building,
right,
they have to submit permit application, building plans, and so forth. We review those, make sure that what they're building is going to meet minimum state code. We issue a building permit and then conduct inspections and eventually issue them a certificate of occupancy.
And then, so do you have investigators that work for you?
Yes.
So
we have 12 agents that cover the state.
Oh, okay.
And they're dual role. So they're code enforcement officers, and that's the bulk of their work. And they're also fire investigators. So when there is a fire and we were requested by a local maybe a local sheriff's office, a volunteer department, a small city department, if they need our assistance with that, we'll go out and conduct that investigation.
And so because they're an investigator, they're law enforcement.
Correct. Yeah, they're certified peace officers. In fact, by statute, I had to become a certified peace officer in my role.
Yeah.
So
Did you went to CLEAT training?
I did.
I
did. At the ripe old age of 63, I went through the
oh man,
CLEAT. So
I should have told you to bring pictures of that. So what's the hot topic right now? This was something that I saw just a couple months ago.
Yeah.
That a lot of the smaller agencies, it's so it's so geographical across this country. Where I come from, if there's really no such thing as a volunteer firefighter, and if there is, it's like an explorer thing or like a training thing. And then you have the Northeast volunteers, which is like a full blown career with $1 million trucks, but nobody gets paid. But then when you get to these frontier rural areas of Oklahoma, it is truly volunteer. That guy goes to work in the morning and is a bagger at Walmart or he's working at the auto parts store. But if a call comes in, he's running.
Yeah.
If a farmer, he's going down to the fire station, and their training is a little bit different than what the firefighters at Oklahoma City get. And I guess this is like a contentious issue, they say.
Well, so if you look across the country, around 75%, give or take, of the fire service agencies in this country are volunteer. So the vast majority of fire service is volunteer. And like you say, that takes on different looks depending on what part of the country you're in. Some are very well funded. They got a lot of training. And, they're as equipped and as trained as any municipal fire department anywhere else. In some other places, like you say, that's not the case. Here in Oklahoma, there's a lot of rural departments out there that aren't as resourced and funded as they need to be to do the kind of work that their community expects them to do. So here in the last couple of years, the Oklahoma Fire Chiefs Association came out with an initiative. And what they wanted to do was start with the fire chief position, not the firefighter position, but the fire chief position in volunteer and rural departments and making sure that there was a level of consistency in training and certification, not too unlike EMS,
Yeah,
across the state. Because right now there is no state required certification to serve in that role as a fire chief.
So you want to be a fire chief, rural department, you don't have to have like
Correct.
firefighter 1.
Correct. Now, a lot of them do.
Right.
A lot of them pursue training as much as they can. But there's some that don't have anything. And so the initiative from the Fire Chiefs Association was to try and implement and institute a consistent level of minimum training and certification for fire chiefs across the state. So meaning if you want to lead a department, if you want to be the one in charge, that you at least have a minimum amount of knowledge, education, and training to be able to make decisions that would ensure the utmost safety of the firefighters on that department and so forth. That's really what this was, because we've had some tragedies in rural departments in this state here in the last few years that were absolutely preventable if somebody at the decision-making level was able to recognize the things that led to these tragedies happening.
So a chief of rural town Oklahoma, I mean, they're going to be command.
Correct.
On a structure fire, not unlike what would be here in Oklahoma City.
Right.
And when you're a firefighter, your command says do primary search. You're going to go do a primary search. But what you're saying is if that fire chief doesn't even have the minimum training to look at the building and see that it's about to fall over.
Correct.
That's the problem, and that's what the initiative
There's no
is to try to fix.
consistency. There's no minimum level.
And so what's the
certification
pushback?
requirement.
Because the stuff that I read, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize it was at that level. It seemed that the articles, and you know how the news is, they're pretty bad about that. I thought it was everybody, but you're saying it's just really a certain level.
A group was formed of some of the fire service agencies across the state. Oklahoma State Fire Service Training, our office, State Fire Marshal's office, Oklahoma State Firefighters Association, basically put a discussion group together to start having discussions about how we could put this together and move it forward. Okay, so there was no set, nothing was suggested to be put in law, statute, whatever. This was being discussed and how it would look and then how it would move forward. So word got out.
Oh no.
And that caused a panic among some that, you mentioned it earlier. I work for a living. I don't have the time to take and dedicate to going to get training and becoming certified in certain, and I'm the only one that's willing to do this. And if I'm not going to do it, no one else will do it. And so that was the pushback. Is that, and part of our discussions, though, were if we were going to make this a requirement, you would have to make sure that there was funding available.
We'll pay you somehow.
Yeah, we'll provide it. It'll be funded and it'll be made available to you. And the part that probably frustrates me the most is right now in Oklahoma, all the pieces are there. So with the career techs and some of their programs that they have in place, like say Oklahoma Fire Service Training, the pieces are in place to make this happen. You mentioned cleat a while ago. There is no cleat for the fire service in Oklahoma. To be a law enforcement officer in this state, you have to have that certification, whether you work for Oklahoma City or small town Oklahoma somewhere. It's the law. Not so for the fire service. If you want to operate as an EMT or paramedic, there are federal requirements, obviously, to be able to do that. And I'm going to go a little bit even further, and maybe my cynical, sarcastic side will come out here, to put those tattoos on that you got on your arm.
Sure.
Somebody had to have certification to cut your hair.
Right.
The person that cuts your hair has to be certified in
there's
this state
a
and have a license to do that in this state.
Yeah.
So to manage a fire department and make decisions where people's lives are hanging in the balance at times, there's no requirement at all.
So this article at the end down here basically says it was a fiery meeting at the state capitol, and I've been in these meetings with EMS, and it's like you're having a discussion, and there's no legislation that's written or anything like that, and you guys, it sounds like you guys are having a discussion, and that discussion in itself scared such a group of people that this pushback happens.
Yeah, and I don't want to say it was 100%. There are actually people there that were in support of such an initiative. They believe it's time for something like that to happen. It's certainly a common model in other states. You know, just like law enforcement, to be recognized as a firefighter in certain states, you have to have a minimum level of training and certification to be recognized and credentialed as a firefighter.
Yeah, that's the way it is in Florida. It's literally called minimum standards.
Exactly.
Well, there's a uniformity behind
Texas is that
training.
way through TEACs and so forth. And like I say, we have all the ingredients we need to make that happen in this state. We lack the will to do it.
I feel like I'm looking in a mirror because it seems like their argument is a supply and demand issue. You know, you do this. We already can't get volunteers. You do this, and it's like this is what paramedics are arguing about across the country. We want the same type of thing. We're just kind of raising it. We already have a minimum. Obviously, you have to be a paramedic, but we're arguing for degrees, and those against it are kind of in the same boat. So it's just interesting to hear how it's a culture. I don't know if to say cultural, but it's definitely community and geographical, where some parts of the country would think that this would be such an obvious issue, and then in this particular community, there's a lot of pushback. You go to Kansas, of all states, Kansas, you have to have a degree to become a paramedic. It's one of only 2 states. Not New York, not California, Kansas. And so it's just interesting how grassroots efforts work. But you know what? A friend of mine told me years ago when I was doing some work at the Capitol with some lobbying stuff, I was complaining about how hard this was. And he said, Justin, it's supposed to be hard to pass laws. It's supposed to be hard because it's the United States. And if it was easy to pass laws, if it was too easy, I should say, we'd end up with far worse issues. Lennon, pull up that other one that I had you queue up. What did I have you queue up? Whatever that sign was. You mentioned 89th.
Oh no!
You mentioned 89th and Council.
Yeah.
A little while ago, and so I
drive by this. It's right by my house.
So what in this is not a G-rated show, so we can I won't make you read it, but I'll read it. And this it's so bad it's comical, but this looks like an 18-wheeler trailer.
You've never drove by this area? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I know exactly what it is. And so it says Keith Bryant, hypocritical MFer, ignores violations, has a hard-on for this property, has twice abused his authority, sending his mindless Peter bumping subordinates on Constitution filing, fruitless searches. The fire department clearly, he forgot the word clearly has money to piss away. And this one I'm not even going to read because I read it a little bit ago and it doesn't even make any sense.
Right.
What in the world are we looking at? What is this?
So again, I lived out in the area of 89th and Council. This individual lived right on the corner of 89th and Council.
Still.
He had a running issue with the city because he wanted to rezone some of his property, not all of it, but the very corner part of his property, wanted to have it rezoned commercial. It was zoned agricultural.
Okay.
I believe from seeing him at a couple of different city council meetings, that his thought was he could sell that property to somebody who might want to put a business on there. Whenever somebody wants to have property rezoned, there's a public hearing, and people in the area are allowed to come in and voice their either support or opposition for that.
So they don't build a Walmart next to your house.
Correct.
Right.
or something that's appropriate for that neighborhood or they believe is appropriate for that neighborhood. So some of the neighbors in that area, not me, went to council and opposed him rezoning his property, so the city rejected that. In fact, they rejected it a second time. So the man was not very happy about that. So now he has an issue with the city. Depending on how your property is zoned, there are various rules, requirements, ordinances, or whatever that kick in. Well, agriculturally zoned property is probably the few, if any, requirements. You can pretty much do with it whatever you want to do. So he starts putting out various items, some people might call it junk,
Large items.
out on that corner to make a point.
This is a busy little corner here.
Yeah, that area's built up, here in the last several years. But so he's making a point that, if you didn't like what I had planned to do, you're really not going to like, I'm going to make this as unattractive as I can. And so then he gets into more of a personal issue with a local developer and a real estate agent, and started putting names on some of this stuff that he had out there, and making statements about them. So how I came into it, it was right before 4th of July. There were, you could still consider that area somewhat rural or,
kind of on the edge.
Urban, not so much, not so much, people have, big lots and, it's not, like really urban core.
Sure.
So some of the people in my neighborhood had their children out in the streets popping or setting off fireworks, which is illegal. And I would have been the first to tell them that's illegal.
Yeah,
You can't do
Oklahoma
that in
City puts
limits.
that press release out every year.
Somehow this gentleman found out about that. He comes on my street. He confronts these people about it. They get into an argument. Police were involved. That type of deal.
Lovely.
And still to this point, I am not directly involved in any of this. Days later, my next door neighbor comes over to me and says, "Have you looked out your back door?"
Oh, God.
And I said, "What's going on?" She goes, "There's something burning over there." So I went outside my back door, and there was a large column of flame coming up above the trees and really, really black smoke coming off of it. So something was burning and burning really hot and intensely. There was a tree line that blocked this person's property from my property. So I couldn't see the house, anything, but I could see the flames coming up out of the trees and the smoke billowing. I called our dispatch and I said, "Has anybody reported any fire at 89th and Council?" They said, "No." I said, "Send 26s over here to take a look. Something's burning in the tree line."
Sure.
I never mentioned the man's property. I never mentioned his name. I never did direct my folks to go directly to his property. In fact, I got out of my car and left my addition and pulled out on 89th Street. And by the time I got over to the corner, I couldn't see anything. That was remarkable to me that I couldn't see any smoke, anything. Something happened really quickly to make that go away.
Right.
So about that time, here come our folks. And I just told them, I said, "Look, in this tree line right here, I saw a lot of flame." And
you're chief at this time. Yeah.
And I said, "But I don't see nothing now." So they said, "Okay, Chief, we'll check around." So they started checking, just looking in the houses that were right there in that immediate intersection. Mm-hmm. And they went to one of my neighbors, and he pointed out this person's property and said, "This person burns stuff all the time. He's got a big pit dug, and he'll set stuff on fire and cover it up." And so he's the one that more or less directed them directly to this man's property. They pull in his driveway, and he comes out to confront them.
The
firefighters.
Engine 26.
Yeah. Comes out to confront them and told them, "Get off his property. I'm calling the police. Our officer said, feel free to go right ahead and call them. I'll call them if you want me to.
Sure.
So he said, all we want to do is take a look and make sure that nothing is on fire. And you have no right to be here. Get off my, So it was a confrontation, but they went and did what they had to do to investigate if there was a fire.
Mm-hmm.
About that time, police officer shows up because this man had pulled his vehicle across his driveway to block the fire engine from coming down his driveway. Police officer gets out. The man starts confronting the police officer. I want these people off my property, using really bad language. And
probably like what's written in these signs.
The police officer asked him, whose vehicle is this blocking the driveway? And the man said, it's mine. He said, you're under arrest for interfering with a emergency.
Sure. I mean,
yeah.
Be no different if there was a
Operation.
grass fire or a house
Correct.
fire back there, right?
So they took him down. I don't think they actually booked him into jail, but he had to go down until he got bonded out and so forth. But that was all on a Sunday afternoon. I got up the next morning, went to the office on Monday afternoon. When I come back toward my house, that sign was already up.
Yeah.
So he believed that I was the one that instructed our folks and directed them to go on his property.
And so would it change? Would the sign, was this like a Charlotte's Web thing? Like you'd come out there and like every couple of days there'd be a different sign?
Yeah, that was one of the more milder ones.
This was the only one I could find. And so did it become like almost like let's go see what the sign says today.
So I never met the man.
Yeah.
Okay, never spoke with him at all. Now, so the city put him on trial for interfering with a fire official in the
so he fought the charge.
Operation. Oh yeah, it was a jury trial. He was acquitted.
Oh no, the jury of his peers. This is a state. This is a state.
His lawyer, I think, made a good case that they were only investigating the report of a fire. There wasn't an actual fire, so he did not interfere with any actual emergency operation. They were merely investigating a report of a fire. Wow. So when it come down to that technicality, but I had to testify, and what I testified was basically what I just told you, is that I never said it was his property. I never used his name. The dispatch recordings were used in court. I never mentioned the man's name or his property specifically. And it came back to me from another person that knows this individual that he was okay with me after that. And the signs,
after the testimony.
Yeah.
But the signs remain?
The last time I was by that area, I think he'd cleaned a lot of it up.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think there's anything more about me. But, it's just, hey, as they say, it goes with the territory. You're not going to make everybody happy. And some people, when they only have limited information, they make those assumptions and so forth. And
right.
I felt bad for the other people because he was putting some really lurid things.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're a public official, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's public. There's all kinds of precedent about talking smack about public officials.
It was such a source of humor and stuff like that on the department, guys who were like, in fact, it was, he'll tell you, I mean, it was almost like a tourist attraction.
Yeah.
People were intentionally driving out there just to see.
What year was this?
I want to say
over 10 years ago.
I want to say 15, 16, somewhere in there.
There's still large artifacts and
artifacts,
some
school buses,
some signs and stuff, and they're in rotation.
Yeah,
too.
in fact, one of the first things he put out there on that corner was an old fire truck or fire engine.
That's right.
Yeah, I thought, man, I wouldn't mind having that to kind of piddle with or whatever.
It is on rotation. He'll take his tractor out there and move things around occasionally. Sometimes it's a bunch of hay bales.
I wish I had time to do all that.
Yeah.
Well, Chief Bryant, man, that's a hell of a story, and it sounds like the story. No, I mean the whole story.
When you talked to me about doing this, you asked me the question: is there anything that's off limits? I wasn't even thinking about this.
Oh no,
no, that's great. No, it's great.
No, for beginning to end, man, you've had a hell of a career, and I'm happy that I got to chat with you. I mean, because, I worked locally and didn't know you back then, and just in prepping for the show, the people I talked to, I mean, that comment's going to stick with me forever. I don't think I've ever heard that comment, before. Being a firefighter's chief, I think as anybody who's a leader, that's got to be something you strive for. So I hope you're proud of that. I'm happy that you were able to. I mean, you served the city, you served the country, and now you're serving the state. It's honorable stuff, man. So
that's what it boils down to. I don't think I've ever been the smartest person ever on things or the most talented or whatever, but going back to maybe when I was a Boy Scout even or whatever, that always registered with me that, you can always serve. You can always find ways to serve, and that's really what it's boiled down to. So that's kind of been the thing that's probably afforded me the opportunity to do some of these really unexpected kind of pretty cool things is just a willingness to serve. So
absolutely,
yeah.
You got it. What's your final word for Lennon back there? He's been quiet the whole show. You got one piece of advice for Lennon moving forward that's going to change his life right now. What would you say?
It may not come to you right away. Take time, be patient, let it come to you. But something will strike a chord with you at some point that this is what I want to do and this is what's going to make me feel fulfilled. Might not be the best paying thing that you could think of or what's going to make you a wealthy person financially, but it's, what you're passionate about and what you love to do is what's going to ultimately fulfill you. So.
Man, that's the exact opposite of what I told him. I told him, you better get your shit.
Go for the bucks.
You got to get your shit figured out and make some money. Thanks for coming in, Chief.
Absolutely.
We'll do it again.
Oh,
and, be safe. And
you too.
Glad to make a new friend.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversations.
See you, Zach.